Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're looking for a review of On Writing by Stephen King, then you are definitely in the right place. I am really excited to talk about this book. First of all, we need to address my book look. I look a lot more gothic today than I meant to. I was really just going for the black and white look of the book because I love the cover of this book. It's so simplistic. I love the writing. I love how the letters are, you know, tactile. Like, I don't know what to call that. So I meant for my look to just look black and white. So I went with like black theme, and any excuse I have to wear black lipstick, I definitely will. But it turned out a lot more gothic and Wednesday Addams than I meant for it. And I can't part my hair over to the side, so I have to part it down the center right now because I'm growing out my undercut a little bit. So now I just look super gothic. So now that that's out of the way, yes, I look gothic. It has nothing to do with the book. It just went for a black and white theme. As a writer, I love Stephen King, but full disclosure, the first Stephen King book I ever read was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, and then I moved on to the Gunslinger series, which I still have not finished. I have finished the fourth book, and I need to move on to the fifth book. So aside from the Gunslinger and the Dark Tower series, and The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, I actually haven't read any other Stephen King novels. I started Salem's Lot, but then I got distracted. So I didn't even count it as even starting it. I got to like page 50 or something like that. So beyond those books, I know he's an extremely prominent writer. He is huge in the writing community, and he is just a noteworthy author, of course. If you haven't heard of him, I don't know what rock you're living under. This is a gem because Stephen King writing about writing, I mean, I already knew it was worth my money. This book is what, 20 years old? I think it came out in 2000. Yes, this book came out in 2000, and the book that I have, this cover, is the 10th anniversary cover, which came out in actually 2010. So it's 17 years old and still relevant AF. I could probably do a better job of actually finding out what authors feel about their own writing. Part of the reason why I don't do that before my book reviews is because I kind of don't want their opinion of their own writing to affect mine. So I apologize if anything I say is kind of out of date because I'm just reading the book, knowing nothing else about the book, whether or not Stephen King still likes it or still stands behind it or anything like that. This book, I think, is going to be super helpful to my writing process because according to Stephen King, I have been doing it all wrong. This book doesn't really need a synopsis because really all it is about Stephen King's experience with writing and any advice that he has about it. It starts off very much a memoir. It says a memoir of the craft on the book, so it's, you know, it's right there. He talks about how writing first became part of his childhood and how he kind of just grew into it and all of that stuff. So it's pretty cool to learn about those aspects of his life. He is such an interesting person. He has gone through so much in his life, and I think the fact that he has gone through so much is why he can write such brilliant characters and brilliant books, because he has experienced a lot of life, and the more life you experience, the more you can write about it accurately, and the more you can appeal to a wider variety of readers. I loved that aspect. I could have read that all day. And in general, this book actually was kind of like I'm reading a mystery thriller novel right now, and I am reading it with the same anticipation that I read this book with, which is weird because it's not like a fast-paced book, but he tells it so much like a story, because it is. That's all storytelling is. This is like telling true or made-up stories to people in an entertaining way, and he is a storyteller, and this book is no exception. So that was really cool. And then he moves on to actual advice about writing and the publishing industry and things, processes that he uses that works for him, that he thinks would work for most writers. He gives some unpopular opinions about what a natural writer should feel and seem like, I guess, in a sense. So that's generally what the book is about. For a spoiler-free review of this book, I think as a writer, it's going to be so helpful to me. I think what I'll do is in 3 months from today, I will check back with you. So hang on. On April 20th, 3 months from now, I will check back in with you about how much this book has genuinely influenced my writing ability and my writing style and process. Because according to this book, I have been doing it all wrong. So I'm going to implement some advice that Stephen King offers in this book as a writer. And then in 3 months' time, I will post another video following up on if that implementation was successful. The writing in this book, of course, it's Stephen King, was wonderful. It read kind of like fiction, not in the sense that what he was writing was like unbelievable. It's just he wrote it with the storyteller's touch, which is great. I love it when people write memoirs or biographies with the style of fiction writing, because then it makes it a lot more engaging and interesting to read, and Stephen King definitely achieves that in this book. I love this book first to last page, really. It's full of really great advice and information, but it also has aspects of his life that people just don't know. Like, I work in a bookstore, and I was telling all my coworkers, did you know Stephen King went through this? Did you know Stephen King did this? Did you know that when he was a child he did this? And everybody was like, whoa, I had no idea. I knew he was into like horror writing, but you know, some of the stories in here that I particularly love is one to do with poison ivy, one to do with his babysitter, and one to do with finding out that his child was being born, that his wife is in labor. So those are 3 stories that you could, if you wanted to read about, you can look forward to in this book, because all 3 of them are very interesting, hilarious, and insightful stories. And then of course at the very end of the book, or towards the end of the book, he addresses being hit by a car, and that experience to read about from a experienced writer. Because, like, you know, I've seen news articles, I've seen YouTube videos of people talking about tragic, horrible accidents they've been in, but none of them are storytellers necessarily, even though they're telling a story. Stephen King is a storyteller, and as he writes it, that aspect of the book read just like fiction in the way that he was telling it. And as tragic as what happened was, he's okay now. And I honestly have to say that it was beautiful the way it was written. He also talks about his struggle with addiction in here, which is actually an aspect of Stephen King I never knew about. And I had no idea that he was an addict. I don't really feel like there's much more I can say in a spoiler-free review. I mean, I gave it 5 stars because honestly, I feel like this might be the only writing book that I ever needed to read. I've read a couple of others. I read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I am horrible at pronouncing names. Why am I so bad at this? I studied other languages, and I've read a couple of other like helpful tips and tricks. I try to brush up on my grammar with grammar books and things like that, just to make sure that when I'm writing I can accurately portray what it is I'm trying to say. But beyond that, I feel like I don't need to pick up another writing book. He kind of even addresses in there, like, if you need writing books to do good writing, then maybe the problem isn't what you know, it's how you apply it, that kind of thing. So that's how I feel about it. I don't know. I loved it. I love this book. It was so good. It was so well written. I love having it a part of my collection. I think it's beautiful. I hate that this texture, it's like that kind of velvety feeling that's really popular these days. Kind of hate how much that shows fingerprints, if you can see. Yeah, it's so gross. Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. See? So bad at pronouncing names. That one has the same texture as this, and it's also black. And I feel like when a book is this texture, maybe it shouldn't be black because of this. So that makes me sad, because I do want the cover of the book at least to be nice looking. But at least it looks well loved, because it was, and I really enjoyed reading this, and I'll probably refer back to it. Which brings me into the spoilery part of this review. So if you have not read this book, please go read it, come back, come to this part of the video, and we'll keep talking about it, and we can discuss it in the comments. So for those of you who've read this book, there are a few things I wanted to highlight, but one of them is like the main points that he touches on. He doesn't really name them like a lot of other books will. Like they'll be like, a lot of other books will say something to the extent of like, here's the title of the chapter, write good dialogue, and then kind of dive into that, but his does not read that way. So, which is fine. I didn't mind that at all. What I ended up doing is I really, really wanted to keep the main lessons of this book fresh in my mind and remind myself of them every time I sit down to write. And so I made these cards that are gonna go above my desk, and because the book is black and white, I decided to do them in rainbow. And I can't hold both at the same time, so I'm just gonna put this down for a second. So, in order of the rainbow, I wrote on these cards, and it's just simple. I didn't want to do anything crazy. It doesn't need to be super prominent. It's just something I want to sit down and read right before I start writing, so that way I can remind myself of the amazing advice that Stephen King gives that I think will be super valuable. I'm going to try to follow his regimen of sitting down in the mornings to write out His is like, I think he said 1,000 or 2,000 words. I want to go for 3,000 because that is usually what I write when I usually write around 3,000 words every time I sit down to write. But I haven't made myself sit down to write on a schedule for a long time. And according to Stephen King, a schedule is a really important feature of being a productive and successful writer. So full disclosure, I'm actually quitting my job. I'm not quitting my job to be a writer, but since I am quitting my job and for a time I won't have a job, I'm going to wake up every morning to write 3,000 words. And I'm not gonna leave my desk. I'm not gonna leave my den, which Stephen King suggests that you close the door, but my den where my desk is doesn't actually have a door. It's just a little open space den. But the thing is that my desk faces away from everything. So even though I can see the kitchen and the dining area from my den, I'm facing away from everything. I'm facing a wall. And the only thing I want to face are these. So I'm going to read off to you what I wrote. These are not official quotes from the book, but they're general messages from the book. So red says, beware of the passive voice. I've always known that. I'm an English major. I've taken many English classes and literature classes, and the number one thing, of course, is the passive voice versus the active voice. So I'm very aware of it, and I don't typically write even naturally with the passive voice, but it does sneak into my writing, and I do need to be aware of it. And I do want to make sure that I remind myself to be aware of the passive voice. Adverbs are not your friend, which is actually something I have learned about in English classes. And when I learned about it, I disagreed with it. But upon reading books with it in mind, I realized that the most effective writing, the books that I enjoy the most, don't overly use adverbs. They're kind of unavoidable, as he states in the book, but they're not 100% necessary to the story. And if you can avoid them, do. And usually you can avoid them. So adverbs are not your friend. The third one reads, read a lot, write a lot. Read a lot, write a lot is kind of his ironclad message. I read a lot already, so that's great. And but I want to be able to read more. Stephen King says at this time in his life, because I don't know if this is true or not anymore, that at this point in his life in 2000, he was reading about 80 books a year. I have read, I read closer to 50 in 2016, and then in 2017, due to a lot of life events, I only read 36. So I want to at least read 50 books this year. I want to try with this momentum I have going with reading to read as many books as possible. So that way by the middle or the end of the year where I have maybe a reading slump or I have another life event, that I'm already caught up on my reading and that I don't have to worry about just reading a certain number of books every month to reach my 50 book goal. Of course, I'm going to try to reach further than 50 books. If I could be Stephen King and read 80 books, that'd be amazing. And I think these book reviews will help keep me on track. For now, the goal is 50 books in the year of 2018. So the fourth one that I have on my green card is write every day. And in parentheses, it says, close the door behind you. Stephen King doesn't elaborate whether or not he counts journal writing and things like that as a form of writing for this specific advice. But I do, as long as you're being creative with it, whether it's working on the novels that I have brewing in my head, or if it's journaling, or if it's blog writing, because I haven't written on my blog in a long time. Sorry to anybody who follows that. I don't think anybody does, but some people comment, so I think I have a little bit of a following. If you want to see my blog, my written one, then you can actually go down into the links below for stephanniedavenot.com. As long as I'm writing every day in some form, I'm going to count that as a success. I would ideally like to be working on my novels and my novel ideas or characters every single day. I'm gonna count it as a success if I even sit down to write in my journal or my blog, or anything like that. So, fifth one on my blue card is see it clearly, then describe it clearly. And then in parentheses, show, do not tell. That one is super important for me because I always see scenes in my head that I'm trying to write very clearly. I'm very much a teller, not a shower, when it comes to the actual application of my writing. So I have to keep reminding myself this one a lot. So I might put like a little gold star on this one because this is actually one that I need to be aware of, because the passive voice, not so much. Adverbs, yeah, a little bit. And like everything else, yeah, it's good to keep in mind, but this is the one that I need to be aware of the most. So I'm probably gonna put a little gold star sticker on this one. The last one that I have, and I actually might add one more card. But the last one that I have, because purple is the end of the rainbow, at least traditionally, is write honest dialogue. So in the section of the book where he talks about this, I really understand what he's saying. I don't know how it applies to me in application. Like, I don't know how honest my own dialogue is. And when I read it these days, it feels forced. Therefore, I think that I have not been writing honest dialogue. And I think I've been writing what Stephen King warns about, which is like cliche dialogue, which has its place in certain aspects of writing, but I think that I really need to work on writing honest dialogue, which is so weird because I'm such an honest person in real life. Like, at my job, I'm known as the vocal one. And honestly, being honest and being completely honest about how I feel about my job and my coworkers and my friends and my family, it has done nothing but good things for me. So being 100% transparent with myself and translating what I practice in my everyday life into my writing, I think is going to be a big challenge for me. I'm not going to say this is my writing Bible, but it was a really great book to just lay out the general advice. At the end, when he talks about publishing and agents and things like that, that got me a little nervous because that's an aspect of the publishing industry I'm not super familiar with, and I'm not 100% confident in navigating. When I get to the point where I feel like I need an agent, I'm a little terrified of the agents that are out there. Thanks to NaNoWriMo, though, I have a little community of people who have actually published books. So when I get to the point where I'm ready for that, I'll probably reach out to them and ask them who they used and how they liked them and what publishers they went with and mistakes they made that they wish they hadn't and things like that. So I have a little community that I can reach out to understand a little bit deeper of what the publishing industry is like. And then I also have some professors that I was very close to when I was taking classes that I haven't talked to in a while, but I'm pretty sure if I shot them an email and I was like, hey, do you know of any good agents, and can you help me with any of this, they would probably reply and help me out. I feel a little okay about my resources, and I feel okay about the support I would probably get when looking for my resources. It's a daunting aspect of the industry and the process of getting a book published that I'm kind of terrified to get to, which is probably why it takes me so long to write things, because I know I'm human and I have flaws that don't make sense, and I'm afraid of success. I am deeply, deeply afraid of success. I'm so afraid of succeeding. I am way more afraid of succeeding than I am of failure. And I wish he had addressed that in this book somewhere, because I feel like a lot of creative people are like that. Really quick, if you have an iPhone, there's this really cool feature that I really need to share with readers, because you actually have the option to like highlight things. So I've been taking pictures of the pages that I like and then highlighting them in the picture after taking them. You just go to edit up in the top, and then with the options in the bottom you tap the more options, and then it has markup, and there's actually a highlighter feature right there, and you can actually highlight things, and it is so helpful. So using that feature, which is not sponsored, by the way, it's just something really handy that I think that readers would love to have. I highlighted a couple quotes that I really liked from the book. So one of them is from page 37, and it says, "Your job isn't to find these ideas, but recognize them as they show up." I think that I got that down to a T. I recognize almost every idea that I have as a really good writing idea. Not necessarily saying that it is good. I'm just saying that every time I have an idea, I just tell myself it is good enough to write down, and I write it down. Sometimes I revisit, sometimes I don't even remember writing it down, but I think I'm really good at least at having a thought and being like, that's an idea. Just write it down even if it's not good right now, because it could be good later. The next quote that I really liked is on page 57, and it says, "When you write a story, you're telling yourself the story," he said. "When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story." So the last card that I was thinking about writing, that I'll probably do on like a white piece of paper to like represent the end of the rainbow or something like that, bring it all back to the book, but is that at some point Stephen King got advice where it was like, where your second draft is your first draft minus 10%, I think is kind of what the general consensus is. And that's kind of what he's addressing here, is that by the time you're ready to write your second draft, you're just taking out all the things that are not part of the story that were put in there either for you or from the moment you were writing it in, or something that will lead to a different story later on, something you can address, but something that is not relevant to the story you were writing and trying to convey for this specific novel. And that is huge advice. I honestly have not gotten to the point where I've ever gotten to write a second draft. So I think I'm going to keep that in mind for when I get there, because the idea of getting to a second draft is daunting and terrifying to me. So I think that this quote makes it a little less terrifying. So I really liked that quote because it felt good. So the next quote that I loved is from page 64. It's quite a long quote, and it's about when Stephen King meets his wife, Tabby, and she recites a poem. And it says, "Her poem also made me feel that I wasn't alone in my belief that good writing can be simultaneously intoxicating and idea-driven. Good writing can be simultaneously intoxicating and idea-driven. That it doesn't have to be just this thing that like comes out of nowhere and is put onto paper and then is super successful and makes you money. It's identifying those ideas, turning them into stories, and having them be idea-driven, but also completely like passionate." I feel like that was just such a beautiful quote, and I love it, and I want to like keep it with me and have it as a friend and hug it all the time. And then the other bits that I love is when he talks about the struggle he went through when writing each one of his novels, that he talks about in this book at least, because he's written some since, and so of course those are not addressed in the book. But I loved reading about those because it makes it feel so much more real. Sometimes when authors are interviewed, and he talks about that in the book, people just ask general questions and they get general answers. Interviews are usually timed. There's usually not a whole lot of time to go into super detail about the actual struggle that went into writing a book. So when you're answering the same question a million times over, you're going to generalize the whole truth. But when he wrote about like The Shining and Carrie and things like that, and how they started off and how they changed and how they progressed and the struggles he had, the roadblocks he got, the writer's block he got, like all of that, and including the literal roadblock, or car, I should say, that got in the middle of writing this book, all of those things, it just shows that life is just going to happen while you're writing, and it's going to affect the way that you write, and it's going to affect the stories you're writing, and it's going to affect how frequently you can write and things like that. So it just made me feel better about being human, I guess. Being a writer who is also human, who is going to have life events happen. So I think that's pretty cool. I thought those parts of the book were super amazing and helpful and like just validating, I guess, that I'm human and there's only so much of that I can control. So I'm super appreciative to Stephen King for taking the time to write this book. And for now, that's really all I'm going to have to say about this book. I will check back in with everybody on April 20th in 3 months from now about how I feel like this book has actually affected my writing, if it has by then or not. But before then, I wanted to let you guys know what I'm reading for next week. So next week, what I will be reviewing is actually 2 books. The first book and its sequel. It's going to be Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Caine and Killman Creek by Rachel Caine. Killman Creek just came out last December. We read, in one of the book clubs that I'm part of, we read Stillhouse Lake together. I actually didn't get to attend the meeting, so we didn't discuss it so much. So I'm really excited to discuss the book on YouTube. You don't know this because I'm doing jump cuts, but I just went into like a 10-minute spiel about the book. So I'm so excited to talk about these books. I'm almost done with Killman Creek. I have like 5% of it left on my Kindle. So look forward to that next week. If you have read Stillhouse Lake or Killman Creek, I'm so excited to talk to you about it in the comments and in the discussion part. If you haven't read it, you have a week to read it in order to discuss it with us next Saturday. So I'm really excited. Tomorrow I'm actually meeting with one of my book clubs about Big Fish by Daniel Wallace. At the point of recording this video, which is actually technically on Wednesday, I have not finished the book, so I don't know much about it, but I'm hoping that my book club will be okay with me recording it, and if not, I'll take notes, and then I will actually probably do a bonus book review for that one at some point this month. So at the very end of the month, which probably won't be edited and posted until February, but on January 29th, I am going to be meeting with my book club for Off to Be the Wizard by Scott Meyer. I haven't done a head count, but I plan on recording at least a audio recording, if not a video recording of us discussing the book. So if you also want to participate in that in February, it'll probably be my video for the Saturday following the meeting, so it'll probably be on February 3rd. So if you want to read the book by February 3rd and participate in a conversation discussion about that book as well, or if you have already read it and you want to discuss it, then check back in with me around February 3rd because I should have a book review for that as well. So there's going to be some bonus book reviews that are coming out. Like I said, doing a lot of reading this year already, so I'm really excited. I'm really excited that I'm already following through with my commitments to my reading. I hope to keep this momentum going. I know I'm going to fall off the wagon at some point, but hopefully I can stay on it as long as possible. I super appreciate everybody who watches my videos, who has participated in discussion, who has messaged me on my Instagram or on my website. Thank you so much for subscribing. I would super appreciate a like. And until next Saturday for Stillhouse Lake and Killman Creek, I will definitely see you guys later. Bye!